Good morning, thank you for joining us. We're here today on this a bit windy, it's been raining morning. The bees aren't actually flying because we're in winter here and it's rainy and windy. Now, if it was a warm winter's day, they would be flying. But you can see here, if you look around the entrance, you can't see any activity of bees. But if we open these side windows, which are a very handy feature, you can see the bees are in there and they've even been collecting a bit of nectar in the winter here. You can see this pattern where they've eaten a lot of honey away and now they're starting to put it back, which is good. So we do get some nice winter flows here in this subtropical region. What we're going to talk about today is swarm management, and it's more important than ever here in New South Wales to do some spring management to make sure your hive isn't going to swarm or to reduce the chances of it swarming. And the reason for that is we're trying to gain control of the Varroa mites that came into the Newcastle port and have been spread around, unfortunately. So the DPI and a whole lot of people and beekeepers are working hard to try and contain that. And one thing we can do to help is make sure our hives aren't going to swarm, because swarming bees means spreading bees, perhaps with the mite, to another location. So just a reminder, we are allowed here in New South Wales now to do our brood inspections, to do our spring management, to harvest honey, but we cannot move a hive yet. So, swarms. Now, a swarm is a natural thing that bees do. That's the natural way they divide. What happens is they will build up, and you'll notice that you cannot even see the comb in here when they're typically in the springtime. They've gotten onto a lot of nectar and pollen and they're going, yes, time to lay a lot of eggs, time to get going. So we've got a big colony to store lots of honey. Now, if you look in here, we're not at that point yet, so we're ahead of the curve, but I wanted to show you prior to spring here in Australia what to do in order to do your swarm prevention. Now there's quite a few different things you could do. One, and this is my favourite method, is you take a split from the bottom box here. The primary trigger for swarming is congestion, not enough room for the queen to lay eggs. Now that can happen for a few reasons. That can happen because there's too much honey in the whole hive and she hasn't got anywhere to lay. So harvesting honey in the springtime is something you can do, and what they'll do is bring up some of the honey from below, allowing room for the queen to lay eggs. So that will relieve a little bit of congestion down here, which is what you're trying to do. Free up some cells for the queen to lay eggs in. My favourite thing to do is to take a split, and that's taking half the frames out of here, putting in fresh frames. That frees up a whole lot of room for the queen to lay, and that is a really good way to prevent swarming. And if you don't want another hive, somebody else surely will. Other things you can do, and I'll be going through this in a minute if the bees are obliging on this cold, rainy day. Normally you'd be doing this kind of brood inspection on a nice sunny windless day. Now what they can do is get a little bit grumpy, but we'll see, and we'll soon see as soon as we open them up what the temperament's like. Genetics plays a big role in that, but what I'll be showing you is how to take out some frames on the edge and replace some new frames towards the middle, giving the queen some new area. The bees will draw comb very quickly and there's brand new cells for the queen to lay in, and that's the primary trigger for preventing swarming. So if you're not going to take a split, then do that. Add some fresh frames in the middle, and or add another brood box or another super if you want to do that. I tend to like to keep them in this configuration, just a bit easier to manage, less to lift, and just take splits. But here we go, we'll give them a little bit of smoke. Now, as saying earlier, the bees aren't even flying yet this morning. It's cold and they're not feeling like it. But we'll see what they're like when we take the box off. I'm going to leave the smoker there. I'm going to put my bail on. Protect yourself if you're new to beekeeping. Make sure you do protect yourself and others around you. So I'm putting on this veil here and making sure it's fastened down with the Velcro over the top of the zippers as well. I've got my gloves at the ready if I need them. I've got a hive tool, I've got my smoker, now we're away. I'm going to take the top box completely off, so I'll start by just taking the roof off here just to make it a little bit lighter like that. I'm going to just put that aside. And now I'm going to loosen up the box. Now, if it hasn't been inspected for a while, it will be a bit tough to actually get the box cracked off. So we need to get this sharp end of your J tool and chisel away in here. And there's an excluder, so it's anyone's guess whether we're going to go above or below the excluder. Today I'm going to go below. I can get my hive tool in there, and I'm just going to loosen that up just by levering up and down. Okay, so that's loosening up nicely now. And you go around and do that on each corner. Now with the flow hive, you've also got a door here you can pull off. That's the one we look in and get the cross section of the comb, and that's become a really useful inspection window. And we take that off because this is a good handle. And here we go again, I'm going under the excluder and I'm levering up. Now that looks like that box is going to come off now. It can be heavy if it's full of honey, so get someone to help you if you need it. I'm just going to rock it like this. Still not quite free, so I'll chisel a little bit more. See if I can get it to come up. Now what I'm noticing is the frames are coming up with the excluder, and that can happen if it hasn't been inspected in a while. So what we need to do is actually push them down again. A second tool's good for that, which I don't have handy. So I'm actually going to use the flow key just to hold this up for me while I put the frames back down. That's it. You're just trying to get them to let go. A couple of bees have noticed that something's going on. They normally get pretty stroppy about the frames lifting with the super for some reason. So there we go. Okay, so a bit of smoke would be good about now. Just about got them free, there we go. And I'm going to add a bit of smoke because, as predicted on this day, they're not too happy about it. I'll put some more smoke in the entrance, and as we lift it, I'll put some here as well. And that'll just have a calming effect after a little bit on the bees. Okay. If they are really grumpy, don't be shy with the smoke. Now this box should come off now without the frames coming up. So let's try that again. There we go. And I'm going to put that on its end over here, just like that, so we don't squash any bees that are on the excluder underneath. So here we have the brood nest, and I'm looking in, seeing quite a lot of honey actually. There's a hive beetle here. It's on its back, which is funny, but generally people give those a little squash because too many of them can really upset your colony. So they are a bit grumpy about this today. They're starting to go my hands a little bit, so I might give them a little bit of a smoke just to mask my own pheromone. So for those that are just tuning in, we're talking spring management today. And taking a split is my favourite thing to do. You take half of these frames out, put them in the new box, start a new colony. But today the method I'm going to show you is to put some fresh frames into the hive so there's fresh area for the queen to lay, and that will reduce the primary swarm trigger. So I'm just looking, what we need to do is choose a nice honeycomb frame on the end that we can actually take away. And once we take that away, we can put a fresh one back in. Now, if you're using naturally drawn comb like these are, we don't actually need to prepare new frames. If you're using wax and wire, you'll need to pre-prepare yourself some frames to swap out. But have a look at this. What we can do is simply lift a frame out and cut the comb out and take that away and enjoy that comb, and then put that straight back into the hive towards the center. So I'll show you how to do that now. So I'm going to choose a frame that's going to come up easily. I'm going to go for this edge one. The edge one isn't always the easy one, but you just have a look and see which one is free to lift. So we're lifting that up now. We're just having a look. We've got a bit of pollen, we've got some honey, and we've got some, we're just checking, we don't want to take a frame out if it's got brood on it. So we want that brood to stay in the hive. So that could be a good one to take. I'm just going to put that up against the edge of the hive because I forgot to put my handy little shelf brackets on there. So typically what beekeepers do is they just rest it up. Now, before you rest a frame, just have a quick look in case the queen is on there. You might not always spot her, but it's a good idea not to orphan the queen from the hive. So I'm just going to lean that up so that if she does happen to be there, she can walk back in. Okay. Now, I'm going to have a look at the next frame as well, just to see what it's like. See if we've got one that's capped we can take. So the aim of the game is to take some honey out to then make space for the queen to lay. Now, this one we can't take because it's got brood already and we want to leave that in here for the bees. Typically, the honey ones are right on the edge. Now let's go and have a look at the other side as well. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below and I'll get to answering those. So there's a nice frame of honey too. It's still not ready, but we're jumping the curve here. It would be ready if it was actually springtime when we're doing this. Usually you'd be doing this in early spring, but today I want to show you how to do it ahead of the curve so you're prepared come spring. More important than ever, if you're in New South Wales particularly, to do your swarm management this year. Now look at that naturally drawn comb. It's gone slightly wonky down here, but that's okay. And what we're going to do is shake the bees off. Now, that might upset them a little bit, but that's okay. A lot of these are bees that are busy doing their jobs and less likely to be interested in stinging us. So to shake one of these, you want to shake in the plane. If you shake that way, the comb might fall right out. So you're shaking in the way that it's less likely for the comb to break out of the frame. Just like that. And now what we need to do is get a bee brush, or in this case I'm just going to use some foliage from over here and brush any bees off that are on the frame. I'm doing that because I'm taking this honeycomb away. We'll take it back to the hive, to the Flow Hive HQ, to enjoy the honeycomb. Now here it isn't capped at all, so normally you wouldn't be harvesting honey that isn't capped like that, but it will look fantastic on a cheese platter with those beautiful hexagon shapes. So we may as well take this one away and enjoy it. And just getting rid of the last little bees here. There we go. And now, because we're a naturally drawn comb, there's no wax or wire foundation. We can simply just chop this out. It's really quite a simple thing. You go around like that, and that beautiful big piece of honeycomb you can take away and enjoy, and this just goes straight back in the hive. So that's one of the benefits of naturally drawn comb, is you don't have to go through that process of preparing frames to swap. Now what we do is this goes back into the hive, and typically we'll put that further towards the center. So we're going to make some space just here, and we're going to drop that frame right in there, and all of a sudden they've got fresh new space to lay. And what it also does is cycle the frames from the center that have probably been used a lot for brood out towards the edge of the hive. So it's a good way to cycle out frames as well. Now I just noticed there's a lumpy bumpy bit here. We can just chop that right off. And we're chopping it right off because we prefer they build in neat rows, so it's easier for us to do our brood inspections. They'll fix that up very quickly. Okay, now this just simply slides in, and now there's a whole lot of new real estate for the bees to draw comb and the queen to lay, which is the primary swarming trigger. So you go for it and do the same with another frame or two, and what that does is just really relieve that primary swarming trigger, and they'll be much less likely to swarm. Any questions? We've got Lainey reading out some questions for the first time, so bear with us here.
There's a great question from Kimberly. She hates wearing gloves, but her bees are angry girls right now. She's in the dearth in the southeast USA, or SE USA. Does smoking your hands really work that well? They seem to be leaving you alone now.
Smoking your hands does help. So the question, if it was too quiet to hear, is does smoking your hands help? This person's got grumpy bees that do go after her hands. Genetics is the biggest thing that plays. The next biggest thing is the day. This isn't a great day. There's a lot of bees home. They're a bit stir crazy. They haven't been foraging. There's no foraging to do. So they're like, right, let's get that mammal. So they are going for my hands a little bit. They haven't stung me as yet. If I really didn't want to get stings, I would put my gloves on. So it depends on your tolerance to stings, I guess. But as time goes on, you'll be able to make those decisions more easily. And you might even notice that I'm noticing they're giving me warning wax into my hands. And at that point, I'll just move my hand away, and then I'll bring it back again. One just did it then. So if I was just to leave my hand in there right now, I'd probably get a sting. So as you go on, you get used to how to behave to minimize stings, I guess.
Okay, great. Good answer. Next one from Shannon. Shannon lives on the hinterland Coffs coast, and they still have frost. So can they split the hives, or do they have to wait for another month?
Okay, I'll be waiting. If you're here in Australia, then do your hive splits just as spring approaches. Now that, if you're up in the east coast and north coast, that'll happen actually a month early. It will start to happen partway through August, but otherwise it'll be September for most places when you'll be watching your bees build up and taking your splits. This hive wasn't actually ready for what we're doing. I just wanted to show you what to do ahead of the curve and help answer questions, because it's really important this year, particularly as we try and stop the Varroa spreading, to limit hives from swarming.
That's all we have at the moment, question-wise.
Okay, if you've got questions, put them in the comments below. I might go ahead and take out one more frame of honey here, which I already have out of the hive. And I'm going to shake the bees off in case the queen's there, and also just to clear them off the frame. Here we go. So to get bees off a frame, normally most things in beekeeping are smooth, gentle movements, but to get bees off you actually need a rapid movement. So I'm shaking it here, just a short, sharp, abrupt shake like this. And that gets most of them off, and the last ones you'll need to brush. Isn't that a beautiful comb? Look at that. We've got capped honey here, so that's what capped honey looks like. We've got uncapped honey here, so they are bringing in nectar, which is fantastic. We've got pollen stores in here. Now, if you haven't chewed on some comb with some pollen, it's a good thing to do just to experience that, because this actually isn't pollen, it's bee bread. So it's fermented bee pollen, and it has a pretty wild flavour. Now, it's not something you're probably going to chew on every day, but it's an interesting experience to do so and to give to your friends to watch their face. The honey is absolutely delicious. Now again, what we're going to do is just brush these bees off by getting some foliage. Foliage is my favourite bee brush because it's disposable and you're not brushing pathogens from one hive to the next. I might even brush them right onto this super here so they can work their way in there. And this is a fishbone fern which has been planted here, and it works quite well. So I'm brushing those bees off, and there we go. We've got a frame with no bees on it now. Now all I need to do is work out where I put that knife. Here it is down here, and we're going to take two nice big pieces of comb. We can keep that for when we have gatherings or cheese platters, and same as before, we're just going to cut that out. Really simple process when it's naturally drawn comb of cutting around the top, and there it is. So they can go in. You can leave a little bit up the top here, that gives them a nice guide to start again. And away we go. So this one is going to go back towards the centre, and that way we've got a beautiful cycle of fresh real estate going in the middle for the queen to lay on when they draw this out, and then the frames that have been used for brood end up cycling out for the edge, and next time these will be darker and ones that we actually want to cycle out. Any questions?
Yes, there's one here from Peter. I use naturally drawn comb but find they always build between the frames as well, making it difficult when removing. Any tips? Okay,
tips to naturally drawn comb. Now, it is less work pre-preparing, but it's a bit more work in the hive. So the major tip is when they're getting going, especially if you just put a new lot of naturally drawn comb in a hive and there's nothing to guide them, then the major tip is to inspect often as they draw it, and you'll get an idea of how fast it's going depending on the season. What you want to do is catch them as they go wonky and straighten them up. Now these aren't too bad, there's a few waves and things, but these are all naturally drawn comb. But sometimes, as you say, they just go wonky, and what you'll need to do is straighten them out. Grab the straight ones, and you might even cut the comb out of the ones that are really wonky. You could even, if they've gone completely crossways, cut sections out and use rubber bands to hold it back in the direction you want them to build. So I'm just looking down here, and I can see in this area there's a bit of a bulge out. So I'm going to do a slight tidy up of this naturally drawn comb here, because we may as well while we're right here. The smoker's running out of fuel. We'll have to top that up. But to do that, I'm just going to chop away and just let it fall, and the bees will clean that up. And that way they're likely to cap it in closer as they build this one out. And the idea is you're just helping them. Once they've got a few straight frames, they tend to go straight after that. So there we go. We've got a couple of fresh frames in towards the centre of the hive. That'll really make a difference, much less likely to swarm. Other things you could do is take a split or add more boxes to your hive. Any questions?
Question here from Kyle. I'm new to beekeeping. Do you let your bees swarm or not?
So, you can't really hang around all day waiting for your bees to swarm unless you happen to live right where your hive is and you work right there as well. And even if you do, they might go too high in a tree for you to reach them. Now, catching swarms is fun for a while, but you will lose bees. So the idea is that you prevent them from swarming by giving them some fresh area in their brood nest or in their hive for the queen to lay, and that will lessen the likelihood of them swarming. Because if half your bees disappear, you'll miss part of the honey flow. Typically they swarm at the time when there's a lot of nectar around. If half your bees go and find a new home somewhere, then you've got less bees to go and store nectar for you. So you'll miss out on a bunch of honey, but also if you're in a suburban area, you could cause a bit of neighbour animosity if they're a bit scared of bees particularly, and there's this big swarm of bees on their washing line when they're trying to hang their washing out. So it's a good idea to prevent swarming by doing a lot of the things we've mentioned today in this live video.
Great answer. I've got a great question from Greg. When adding a second brood box, can you leave the super on or let them build up in the second box before putting it back on?
So I'm just having trouble hearing you a little bit.
When adding a second brood box, can you leave the super on or let them build up in the second box before putting it back on?
Okay, you're adding a second brood box. So if you were adding a second brood box, then what I'd recommend is you wait till this box is full and your super is at least mostly full before you add a second brood box. And then you'd be adding it because they need more space. They're really building up. You're seeing a lot of bees in the window. So you'd be leaving your super on to keep that space and adding to it by adding a brood box underneath your super. Now that could go in between your brood box and super if you're using conventional frames, or if you're using naturally drawn, you're actually better off with it underneath, because the bees, as they hang down, are more likely to build straight comb. So if you're using naturally drawn comb like this, add your brood box underneath this brood box here and keep your super on top.
Okay. Aussie Beekeeping asks, are you doing sugar shakes, alcohol washes or drone uncapping? And what's your preferred method?
Okay, so there's a few methods here that are happening in New South Wales right now to monitor and work out how far the Varroa have spread. So sugar shake is less invasive. You're basically using icing sugar in a jar to knock a bunch of mites off, and you'll be collecting them from the brood frames. Now we've released a few videos to show you how to do that. The alcohol wash is slightly more effective, but it does kill the bees in your jar. It's the same thing as shaking some bees around in alcohol. There's another thing that we can do as flow hive board. We can make what's called a sticky board. And we'll put some information out about that, and in the coming weeks we'll be showing countries where they have Varroa mites is they put a sticky board in, which is shortening, kofa, or a mixture of vegetable oil and beeswax. It's just basically a sticky piece of cardboard. Slide it in under the screen. Any mites that fall through, that get dislodged off the bees, will actually get stuck on that sticky board. And what they normally are looking for is less than 10, then that's got a low infestation and they probably won't bother with treatments. But more than 10 mites in a 24-hour period, they're then looking to treat that hive, depending on the beekeeper's philosophies and what they do with mites. They'll be treating that hive to lessen the mite population so it does less damage to the hive. Now here in Australia we haven't had mites before, so it's all new to us. And what we would be doing that for is actually to look for the presence of Varroa mite in a hive. So that's a very non-invasive thing. You don't even need to pull your hive apart, and we could be helping to notice whether there's any mites falling through the screen bottom board. So we'll be talking more about that in the coming weeks and showing you how to do some of these methods. I'm actually going to put this hive back together now. I've had it apart for a while. It's not the best day to be beekeeping like this. One tip, and this is a good tip for naturally drawn comb to address that question earlier, is make sure your frames are pressed together with the space on the edge. Really important for naturally drawn comb, because if you leave a gap, let's say you're like that, there's a gap there, and the bees will start building comb in between because the spacing's not right. So press the end bars of your frames together, leaving any excess space on either side. Now we're ready to put the hive back on top. Now I've left the excluder in place and it looks pretty good. I can't see many bees on the outside. It's a good time, if I just clear away that bee there, to just put the super right back on again.
Do you feel like answering a question while you're doing that?
I could try. Yeah. So that's going right back on here, like that. And the excluder is a bit out of line, but we'll get that next time because we didn't actually unstick it from the super. Questions?
So, Trisha is having a dry summer in San Diego. She just put a new super on a few months ago and she doesn't have much honey yet. Do bees make room in the brood box by uncapping honey cells? I've noticed some honey leaking in the bottom tray.
Okay. Honey leaking into the bottom tray would be unusual, but it typically happens if you're getting in there and manipulating comb like we have been today and cutting bits off, you'll get some honey going down, or if you've been harvesting, sometimes you'll get spills that go down to the bottom tray. But yes, the answer is they do uncap and move honey. So bees, what they'll do when they need space, they'll move the honey from here up into the top box, providing there is space. So that's one of the things to do for your spring management to prevent swarming, is actually harvest honey, allow some space for the bees to move honey from down here up to there. Otherwise you can get what's called honey bound, where they're trying to lay but they can't. There's too much honey coming in, there's nowhere for the queen to lay.
Okay. Bloating is the name of this person's question. How often do you have to split with the 1 deep and super method?
How often do you have to split? Not often. One split in a season would be enough to drastically reduce the swarming triggers. Unless you have particularly swarmy genetics, you just get bees sometimes that no matter how hard you try, they want to swarm. But mostly, if you take a split from a hive, it'll take them the majority of the honey flow for them to build back up, and that will really reduce any tendencies of swarming. And if you are splitting at that spring moment when they are preparing, you might even notice they're already preparing queen cells, so you can put them straight into the split, and that way you've also limited it. Now that's one thing we didn't talk about, and I didn't notice it in there on the frames. If there's queen cells, so ideally we would go through and would do a full brood inspection looking for queen cells as well. Some beekeepers will, some beekeepers won't. They'll knock off all the queen cells to limit swarming as well. So that's another thing you can do. If you don't know what you're doing, then leave them. Perhaps your hive's queenless and they need to raise another one, for instance. But if you're a bit more confident, you know the hive's not queenless, you can see eggs and young larvae, then you could knock off the queen cells, which would mean they're less likely to swarm because they're not raising a new queen to do so. That's another thing you can do.
Okay, Warren from Brisbane. We've had to move our hive 30 metres, about a metre a day to get it more winter sun. The bees are now coming and going in all directions. Will they settle again in time?
The answer is they will. So if you suddenly move your hive 30 metres, they'll be quite confused. Bees do geolocate to the spot. So beekeepers conventionally, when they're moving a hive, would move it more than 6 kilometres or 4 miles away. They'll leave it there for a month and then move it back. And that's because the foragers only live for so long and they would have forgotten the landmarks by the time they're moved. And that's the way a lot of beekeepers will move a hive. But 30 metres is a short distance, and it's a hassle to go and pack up your hive, take it away on a truck and take it back again and so on. So there's a couple of methods you can do that are helpful with a 30 metre move. One is you can just go a couple of metres at a time and slowly creep there, just a couple of metres a day. But it depends on the terrain whether you can do that. A trolley's good for that method. Another one is you can do what's called a distraction technique, where you move your hive 30 metres as you've done, and you do that in the early morning, and then over the front of the entrance you might tape an old t-shirt or break up a whole lot of foliage and put it there. What you need is an obstacle. The bees come out with a lot of enthusiasm, racing out of the hive to go and do their pollinating. They run into that obstacle and they go, whoa, something's different. And that triggers most of the bees to take in new landmarks and to reorientate to the new spot. You'll still get 5% returning to the old spot. So that could be something you could do now. I'm not sure when you moved it, but you might like to put an obstacle right outside your hive in at the new location. Just break off some branches and put them there, something like that. And that will help a lot of the bees that are going out to forage to reorientate. Another thing you could do, because they're probably forming a ball back at the old spot 30 metres away as the foragers return, is just put a box there of any sort. If you've got an old bee box, great. If you've got a cardboard box, anything like that. And the bees will actually collect there, and you can ferry them across to the new location. You might have to do that a number of times on a number of days to move all of those lost foragers to the new location. It's amazing, isn't it, how they geolocate to the spot. It's like moving this hive just a couple of metres that way, the foragers would return right here going, where's my hive? They're that accurate with their locations. We've got time for another question.
Okay, this is from Shannon. With the normal size cells bees make compared to the flow hive pre-made cells, does this stress the bees to fill up deeper cells of the flow hive?
That's a great question and good observation. So brood cells are 5.3 millimetres in diameter, usually, give or take. When they're making honey away from the brood nest, they're not using it for, if they're not using it for dual purpose, they'll make larger cells. So in choosing the flow hive cell, which is closer to 6 millimetres in diameter, then what I did was I measured comb in natural, like under the roof here, where they're away from the brood nest and they're creating comb in their natural way. And I measured it in wild hives, and I carefully observed what size cell they would like to use when they're away from the brood nest to store honey. Because remembering, we want them to store honey, not brood, in the flow frames. And it is closer to around 6 millimetres. So they do 6 millimetres, and they also do deeper cells. So we were mimicking what they do naturally when they want to store honey, not brood, in the flow frames. So that's why you'll notice the cells are a bit bigger. Thank you very much for all of your great questions. Tune in next week. Remember, if you're in New South Wales, if you haven't already registered, if you're a new beekeeper, then make sure you do that. Really important. A lot of information coming through from the DPI at the moment. We would have sent you reminder links after you ordered, so you can look up them, or just simply go to the DPI and we'll put links below, and you'll find links on our website. Make sure you are registered if you're not already. Also, remember, you cannot move a hive at the moment, but you can do your spring management. You can harvest honey here in New South Wales. Fingers and toes crossed that we can get on top of the situation and we can keep Australia Varroa mite free for many years. Thank you very much for tuning in. Same time next week. Put your questions in the comments below. Let us know what you'd like us to cover, and we'll have something interesting to show you.